The building was on Grand Concourse, near 183rd, one of those pre-war brick towers with the little tile lobby that always smells like old cooking oil no matter what time of year. 12 floors, 1 elevator, and the elevator was overdue for its yearly by about 4 months. That's how I ended up there on a Tuesday morning in March, coffee in one hand, service key in the other, expecting the most boring day of the week. I've been doing this 11 years. You get a feel for a car, the way the door lines up, whether the counterweight is dragging, the sound the brake makes when the car sets down. This one felt fine going up. Slight rattle on floors 6 through 8, nothing crazy. I rode it a couple times end to end, then killed the power at the machine room and went to the top to start from the pit down. The pit is where I found the first rope. It was strung across the shaft at about ankle height, from one guide rail to the other. Thin white nylon, the kind you'd get at a hardware store for a clothesline. Puled tight, no knot at either end, just wrapped and tucked. Clean work. I stood there with my flashlight for a full minute, trying to figure out what I was looking at, because ropes in an elevator shaft are not a thing. Not ever. They snag on the car. They kill people. You don't put rope in a shaft. I climbed up to check the car top, and there was another one. Same nylon, same tension, strung between the guide rails, maybe 4 feet above the roof of the cabin. Then another one higher. I counted 6 by the time I got up to floor 9, all spaced roughly the same distance apart, each one perpendicular to the last. Some ran left to right, some front to back, like somebody had built a grid inside the shaft, a lattice, and had done it slowly, one rope at a time, whenever the car was parked at the right height. Which meant somebody had been getting into the shaft regularly. I sat on top of the car for a while thinking about that. The shaft doors don't open from the outside without a key or a drop bar. The machine room is padlocked. Either somebody had keys they shouldn't have, or somebody was riding on top of the car with the maintenance hatch open, and neither of those things made me feel great about the last few years of this building's inspection history. I texted my dispatcher to say the job was going to run long. She sent back a thumbs up. I came back down, got in the cabin, and started pulling the panel off the button column. Standard check, I do it every time. Look for burnt contacts and loose wires. That's when I saw the camera. It was tucked into the wiring cavity behind the floor buttons, held in place with a strip of black electrical tape. Not a security camera, not a store-bought anything. It was a little board with a lens the size of a pencil eraser, wired to a small lithium battery pack, and what looked like a cheap Wi-Fi module, the kind hobbyists use. Homemade. Careful work, actually. The lens was angled through a pinhole drilled in the panel, and when I put the panel back to check, the pinhole lined up right between the button for floor 6 and the button for floor 7, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. Whoever installed it wanted to see which floors people pressed. I sat in that cabin, doors closed, alone, and I did not touch the camera again. My first thought was that this was some kind of building security thing the management had done on the cheap and forgotten to tell me about. But management doesn't string clothesline across an elevator shaft. Management doesn't hide a Wi-Fi camera behind a panel that only a tech is supposed to open. And the battery pack meant somebody was coming to swap it. Somebody who knew the maintenance schedule well enough to do it between visits from people like me. I took the elevator up to 12 to find the super. The super's office is on the ground floor, but he lives in 12B, and I knew from the sign-in sheet that he'd been up in his apartment that morning, waiting for a delivery. I stepped out of the car, and the hallway was quiet, the way apartment hallways get on a Tuesday, that thick carpeted quiet where you can hear the fluorescent tubes humming. 12A was on my right, 12B, the super's, was down the end. 12A's door was open, not wide, just cracked about 6 inches, enough to see a strip of light and the corner of a room. I didn't want to look. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't being nosy. I was trying to walk past to get to 12B, and my eyes just went sideways the way eyes do, and I saw what was on the wall inside. Photographs, rows and rows of them. Printed on regular paper, the kind you'd run off a home printer, taped up in a grid that covered most of the wall I could see. People, old lady with a walker, 2 kids and their mom, a guy in a UPS uniform, A woman coming out of the elevator with grocery bags. Each printout had something written on it in marker at the bottom. From where I was, I could read one of them. It said 4F, weekdays 7:10. I kept walking. I don't know why I kept walking. I think part of me was hoping if I got to 12B and knocked, the super would explain it, the way supers explain everything, and it would turn out to be some tenant's weird art project. He didn't answer the door. I knocked 3 times. Nothing. I stood in that hallway with my back to 12A, and I could feel it behind me. The open door, the strip of light. I took my phone out and I called 911 from right there. I kept my voice down. I told the dispatcher I was a service tech at the building and I'd found surveillance equipment in the elevator, and I was standing outside an apartment where I could see what looked like photographs of the tenants on the wall. She asked me if anyone was inside. I said I didn't know. She told me to go downstairs and wait outside and not to talk to anyone on my way out. I took the stairs, 12 floors. I didn't want to be in that elevator anymore. The cops came fast, 3 cars, and then more. They cleared 12A, nobody was home. Whoever was renting it had gone out or had left days ago. They couldn't tell yet. The photos on the wall covered every apartment in the building except one, 12A itself. The tenant hadn't taken a picture of his own door. Detectives came later that afternoon, and I gave them a statement in the lobby. I showed them the camera in the elevator panel and the ropes in the shaft. One of them, a woman with a very quiet voice, kept asking me about the ropes. How many? What height? Whether the spacing was even. I told her what I could. She wrote it all down and didn't say anything about what she thought. The apartment had been rented through some online listing 3 months earlier. Fake documents. The name on the lease didn't exist. The real leaseholder was a guy who'd moved to Tampa in December and had listed the place with what he thought was a legit rental agent he found on Craigslist. He'd never met the person actually living there. Rent came in on time every month, wire transfer, no complaints from the building. The camera got sent to a lab, the ropes got cut down and bagged. I asked the detective later, when she called me to follow up, what the grid in the shaft had been for. I told her I'd been thinking about it, and I couldn't come up with anything that made sense. Measuring the car's position? Some kind of trip line? A way to know if somebody had been in the shaft between his visits? She said they had theories. She said she wasn't going to share them with me. I still service that building. New tenant in 12A, nice guy, works nights. The elevator runs fine. Every time I pull the button panel to do a check, I look at the wiring cavity for a second longer than I need to. The container came in around 2 a.m., and I almost let it through. That's the part I keep going back to, not what was inside. The part where I almost just scanned the tag and sent it down the line like the other 40 that shift. I was working the intake sort at a waste processing facility in Gary, Indiana, February 2021. Middle of that cold snap where the lake was throwing snow at us every other night, and half the guys called in sick because their cars wouldn't start. So it was me and 2 forklift operators on the whole floor most nights, and one of them, Reggie, mostly stayed in his cab drinking coffee that had gone cold hours ago. My job was basic. Trucks pull up to the bay, drop off industrial containers. I check the manifest, scan the barcode, log the origin, route it to the correct processing line. Chemical waste one way, contaminated fabric another, construction debris to the pit. Most of it came from the same 6 or 7 companies. You get to know the truck drivers. You get to know the smells. Solvent smells sweet. Insulation smells like a wet dog. You stop noticing after a while. Around 2, a truck I didn't recognize backed in. Driver was a big guy in a Carhartt jacket, didn't say much, handed me the paperwork through the little sliding window. I glanced at it. Origin was listed as a facility outside Cleveland. That was already weird. We didn't take Ohio loads. Different processing contracts, different EPA jurisdictions. I told him he was probably at the wrong plant. He just shrugged and said, "Dispatch sent me here. Take it up with them." Then he climbed back in his cab and pulled off before I could push back on it. So now I've got a container sitting in the bay with paperwork that doesn't match anything in our system. Regulation says I flag it and hold it until first shift comes in and someone in the office decides what to do. That's a 5-hour wait. Reggie was asleep in his forklift. The intake line was backed up behind it. And honestly, I was tired, and I figured if I just processed it as generic solid waste, it'd get sorted on the belt anyway and end up where it was supposed to be. I unlocked the top hatch. That was the standard first look. You crack the lid, shine a light in, confirm the general category, then send it to the right line. The smell was the first thing that was off. It wasn't chemical, it wasn't rot. It was old paper and mothballs and something like the inside of a jewelry box my grandmother used to have. Cedar and dust. I climbed the little ladder on the side and pointed my flashlight down. The container was full of boxes, cardboard boxes, taped shut, labeled in marker with numbers, stacked neat all the way to the top. That's not what industrial waste looks like. Industrial waste is loose and ugly. Whatever this was, somebody had packed it deliberately. I should have closed the hatch right there and called it in. I know that now, but I was curious in that stupid way you get at 3 in the morning when your brain isn't fully online. I reached in and pulled the top box out and set it on the platform next to me. Cut the tape with my box cutter. The first thing I saw was a wedding photo, black and white, a man and a woman standing on the steps of a church, and on the back somebody had written Ed and Marlene, June 1961, in blue ink that had faded to almost nothing. Underneath that was a set of dentures in a plastic case, a rosary, a stack of birthday cards tied with a rubber band. A driver's license issued to a woman named Marlene expired in 2019, a cheap gold-plated bracelet. I stood there on that ladder for probably a full minute just looking at it. I opened another box. This one had a man's things, a wristwatch, still ticking, a wallet with $16 in it, and a Meyer receipt from October, photos of grandchildren, a prescription bottle with the label peeled off, a little wooden cross. I opened a third. Toys, a stuffed rabbit with one ear chewed off, coloring books, a pair of kids' shoes, size maybe 6 or 7, worn at the toes, and underneath those, an old woman's reading glasses and a pill organizer with the days of the week printed on it. That was when I started to understand what I was looking at, even if I didn't have the words for it yet. Every box was somebody, not somebody's. Somebody. The whole life boiled down to the stuff nobody came to pick up. Photos and jewelry and paperwork and the little useless things you kept in a drawer for 40 years because you can't throw them out. The kind of stuff a family goes through after a funeral, sorts through, keeps some, donates some, cries over. Nobody had cried over these boxes. They'd been cataloged, numbered, sent to Indiana in an unmarked container to be burned with the rest of the trash. I climbed down. My hands were shaking a little, but not the way I expected. It was more like the shake you get after you've been holding something heavy too long and you finally put it down. I hit the red stop on the intake line. The whole belt shuddered and quit. Reggie sat up in his cab like I'd shot at him. "What the hell, man?" "Get the supervisor," I said. "The night one. Get him down here now." He must have seen my face because he didn't argue. He got on the radio. The night supervisor was a guy named Doyle. Ex-Marine, didn't have a sense of humor, which for once I was grateful for. He came down, looked at the paperwork, looked in the container, opened one box himself. He stood there with a birthday card in his hand and didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "Nobody touches this. Nobody. I'm calling the sheriff." The sheriff came, then the state police, then 2 people in suits who didn't tell me who they worked for. They put tape around the whole bay and told me to sit in the break room and not leave. I sat there until first shift came in and stared at the vending machine for 6 hours. I gave a statement that morning and another one a week later. What I found out afterward, in bits and pieces over the next year, was this. The boxes came from apartments and houses across 3 counties in Ohio. Elderly people who'd died alone, no family or family that couldn't be found or family that just didn't come. When somebody dies like that, the county sends a social worker to inventory the estate. Then it goes into storage. Then, if nobody claims it in a certain window, it's supposed to be auctioned or destroyed through the proper channels. Somebody in that office had been skipping the middle steps, taking the jewelry, taking anything that looked like it might be worth something, and the rest, the photos and the cards and the toys and everything that was just a life, they were sending to us, off the books, to be burned quiet. I don't know what all they figured out in the investigation. I know 2 people got charged. I know the number of estates involved was in the hundreds. I know one of the detectives told me, off the record, that my container was the first physical evidence anybody had that this was happening on that scale. I still work nights at the plant. I still do intake. I open every hatch now, every single one, even when the paperwork's clean and the driver's a guy I've known for 6 years. I don't know what I think I'm going to find. I just check. 3 days back in Austin, and the guy across the hall already knew things I hadn't told anyone in the building. I moved back in early August of 2022, right at the tail end of a breakup that had chewed me up for the better part of a year. I'd been living in Denver with him, we'd split, and I came home to my old apartment complex off South Lamar because my best friend Mel lived 1 floor up and my mom was a 40-minute drive away. It was one of those Texas apartment blocks with concrete stairwells that smelled like hot iron in the afternoon and a pool nobody swam in because the water was always warm as a bathtub. My unit was on the 2nd floor, cheap laminate, popcorn ceiling, a vent above the stove that rattled when the AC kicked in. For the first 2 days, I did almost nothing, slept a lot, cried in the shower a couple of times because it was the one place the sound got swallowed. Ate cereal for dinner because I couldn't be bothered to cook. Standard breakup recovery, nothing dramatic. On the 3rd day, a Thursday, I was hauling a bag of trash down to the dumpster when I ran into Ray. Ray was the neighbor across the hall. 40-something, thin, always in a faded band t-shirt, worked from home doing something with computers I never fully understood. In the 2 years I'd lived there before Denver, we'd exchanged maybe 40 words total. Hey, how's it going? Hot enough for you? That level. Polite, distant, fine. He was checking his mail when I came out of the stairwell. He looked up and smiled like he'd been waiting. Hey, he said, good to see you back. I said thanks, said something about the heat, kept walking. He said, I'm really sorry about what happened out there. I stopped. It was such a specific thing to say. Not welcome back, not how was Denver, sorry about what happened. I turned around. What do you mean? He tilted his head a little, sympathetic. The breakup, that sounded rough. Now, I want to be clear here. I had not talked to Ray in almost 14 months. I hadn't posted anything about the breakup online. I don't do social media beyond Instagram, and my Instagram had been a black hole since May. I hadn't told my mom half of what actually went down. I definitely hadn't told anyone in the building. I said something like, how did you hear about that? And he just kind of shrugged, still smiling in that soft, understanding way, and said, word gets around. You doing okay? I said I was fine. I threw the trash in the dumpster and went back upstairs and locked my door and sat on the kitchen floor for probably 20 minutes, trying to figure out what had just happened. On its own, it could have been nothing. People talk. Maybe my mom knew somebody. Maybe an old co-worker had mentioned it in passing at HEB. Austin is a big city that acts like a small town if you've lived there long enough. But it kept happening. Friday afternoon, I was carrying groceries up the stairs and he was coming down. He held the door for me, and as I passed, he said, the kitchen light in your place. If it flickers, it's the ballast. Landlord will replace it if you ask. I hadn't mentioned the light. It had flickered exactly twice, both times when I was alone at night. Saturday morning, I was getting into my car to go to the farmer's market, and he was watering a plant on his balcony, which faced the parking lot. He waved, then he called down, tell Mel I said hey. Mel is my best friend, upstairs. She and I had barely been seen together yet. She'd come down once, briefly, on Wednesday night to drop off a bottle of wine and hug me for a long time and leave. That was it. I sat in my car with the engine off and my hands on the wheel, and the plastic of the steering wheel was already too hot to hold, and I thought, he is watching me. He knows when I come in and go out. He knows my friend's name. He knows about the light in my kitchen. He knows about a man I dated in another state. I skipped the farmer's market. I drove around for an hour instead, and every time I hit a red light, I tried to think of a rational explanation, and every explanation felt like I was doing his work for him. That night, I did something I'm not proud of. I stood in my dark living room and looked at his door through the peephole. His hallway light was on. I could see his shadow moving under the crack at the bottom of his door. He was up too. I stood there for almost 15 minutes. Sunday morning, I called Mel and asked if I could come up. She poured me coffee. Her apartment smelled like lemon and old books. I told her, calmly, exactly what had happened. The breakup comment, the light, the wave from the balcony, her name. I watched her face while I talked, and somewhere around the mention of her name, her expression changed. She set her mug down carefully. "Oh no," she said. "Oh no, no, no." She'd known Ray for over a year. They weren't close, but he was in a book club with her. They'd gotten drinks a few times in a group. He watered her plants when she was out of town. When I'd been going through the worst of it in Denver, I'd been calling Mel constantly, crying on the phone, long voice notes, and she, in the way people do when they're worried about a friend, had been talking to somebody about it. Ray had asked how she was. She'd said she was stressed about me. It had come out in pieces over months. My name, what he'd done, when I was coming back, the apartment I was moving into. She hadn't thought of any of it as a secret. She'd thought of it as venting to a friend. The kitchen light. She'd mentioned it to him last week because he'd told her the same thing had happened in her unit. He wasn't watching me. He was just a guy who'd been handed a very detailed picture of my life by someone who loved me and who had no filter about what to do with that picture when he finally met the person it belonged to. Mel cried. She apologized in the specific awful way people apologize when they realize they've caused something they can't take back. I told her I understood. I did understand. I said it was okay, and it was okay, mostly. I still see her. We're still close. Ray moved out that following spring for reasons that had nothing to do with me. But here's the part I keep coming back to. For those 4 days, before I knew, I had genuinely believed a stranger had built a file on me. I'd checked my locks twice a night. I'd stopped opening my blinds. I'd started walking a different route to my car, and when I found out the truth, the relief lasted about an hour. Then the other thing set in, and it hasn't really left. Mel is one person. She loves me. She talked to one guy in a book club, casually, over the course of a year, and he ended up knowing the flickering light in my kitchen and the name of the man who broke my heart in a state I no longer lived in. I have other friends. My mom has friends. My sister has coworkers. Every person who cares about me has, somewhere, mentioned me to somebody I've never met. I don't know how to be around that. I still don't. I answer when Mel calls. I tell her less than I used to, not because I don't trust her, because I finally understand that the things I say don't stay where I put them, and by the time I meet the person holding them, they'll already be smiling at me like they've been waiting.